Okay, one more to unmute. Good. So anyway, any feedback you have for us is very welcome. Via email, or I don't know if we have means for collecting the feedback. Do we? Right here on site, for example. So my name is Susanna Lehvävirta. I'm the director of HELSUS and at the University of Helsinki. And my title, fun title, Donuts or Wedding Cake, today still has some serious contents. So I'm going to quickly run you through some 15 years of development in sustainability science and conceptualizations of sustainability transformations. But it's going to be very quick, and I'm not going to go deep into it. So then afterwards you have the chance to go more deep yourself. So I start with the planetary boundaries framework that was first introduced in 2009, and borrowing the words of Ingo Fetzer from Stockholm Resilience Center, it highlights the environmental consequences of living in the Anthropocene and our responsibility as future stewards for the planet. So it's quite anthropocentric. But I think it's nevertheless useful because it very clearly and nicely portrays the so-called safe operating space and how we exceed the planetary boundaries to the level that we are threatening the resilience of many planetary systems. I suppose most of you are very well familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? That were adopted by the United Nations members in 2015. They are legally non-binding policy objectives to reach sustainable development by 2030. Last year, there was another publication or declaration by the Sustainable Development Group in the United Nations that provides us investment pathways to deliver the SDGs. They note in that paper that because the SDGs can be seen as sides of a Rubik's Cube, where a solution on one side may lead to unwanted or zero positive impacts on the other side of the cube if we don't take into consideration the whole. They note that it seems that we will not be achieving the targets by 2030 because of a siloed decision-making tradition, and I'm afraid that this still also holds for research too often. So the things that they are providing or listing here as key transition or multiplier effects across the SDGs is food, energy, digital connectivity, education, jobs, social protection, climate change, biodiversity. Sounds okay. But interestingly, yes? For me, it's okay.
The whole event is recorded in any case.
Yeah, in that sense, it's easy to. Yeah, let's. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. So interestingly, the European Environmental Agency also published their drivers of change the same year as the previous ones. And what is interesting, they are to some degree, at least seemingly quite different from the previous list that I showed you. So for example, there is this growing, urbanizing and migrating global population, or increasing scarcity of resources, or power shifts, or diversifying values and lifestyles and governance approaches. But what they have in common with the UN publication is that they portray intense connections between all the drivers of change. But I promised you wedding cake, didn't I, in my title? So this is the Stockholm Resilience Center wedding cake from 2016 that illustrates that economies and societies are all embedded in and dependent on the biosphere. So this is how they wanted to connect the SDGs to the planetary boundaries. And I think this is also very illustrative of how things can be seen. But in case you prefer donuts, here is the famous Rovers donut model from 2017. And that presents the so-called safe and just operating space for humanity, which is balanced between overexploitation of the planetary resources and insufficiency to fulfill human needs. And here economy is presented as just one part of the human society, not an entity of its own. But all of the previous models that I showed you, and many other models as well, have been criticized to be too anthropocentric, so that they fail to represent other than human species sufficiently. And therefore, Ruprecht with his colleagues published a paper regarding multi-species sustainability. And they suggest that multi-species decision-making could be a tool to achieve stronger sustainable development on the planet. So what I like about their visual model here is that they portray the biosphere, the abiotic limits or boundaries of the planet and the biosphere, but they also distinguish or like clearly bring up the microbial societies, plants and animals. And they argue that only when the whole system, the non-living and living system, is in sufficient balance, can human societies and human formal and informal economies like strive. And all of this is quite exciting to me at the moment, because at HELSUS we are renewing our research themes. So our researchers are worried about the fact that now the 2020 to 2030 so-called critical decade has turned into a global polycrisis, and we are not solving the sustainability problems. Then the question is how to navigate in the era of possibly collapsing or already collapsing systems, planetary and human systems, and what is the role of hope in this whole issue. And from these questions, we have started our rethinking, and this very preliminary draft figure, which will not be the final outcome, this is just one step, is a result of a multi-step process where we have asked our members and other people what could be the most important research themes for HELSUS from now on. And what has been, to some degree at least, agreed on is that is the strong sustainability conception, which is now not visible because I did something, but never mind. And but the idea is that the whole thing is based on systems thinking and recognizes the planetary boundaries and as definite, and also the needs of other than human species. And then there are, it's hard, for the rest, it's really quite difficult to easily agree on, because different wordings mean different things to different people. Just to give you an example, for example, here is the collapse. So that was brought up as some sort of a radical statement about that we should be in research now focusing already on even the collapse scenarios and what will the new world look like? How will all the species survive? But then others feel that it's really too negative, really too abstract, or really too broad a concept. Or another example is like the learning or unlearning or relearning. Some people feel that it's very, very narrow, while others feel that it's like all over the place. And then the question is how to arrange a figure like this, whether it should be a donut or a wedding cake or some other kind of a solution. So I hope during the first quartile of next year we will have something more ripe to present regarding HELSUS. But I think all of this that I showed you also nicely shows this huge evolution that is going on, that sustainability science and sustainability transformations are alive. They are evolving. They are important. That's why we have all this thinking. But let's forget this figure. So with these words, I want to welcome you here, and I'm really excited to hear what our speakers today will have to say, because I hope to be learning much more. and increase my systems thinking capacity much more from what it is now. And next, I will, I'm lacking Katriina, Soini, and Riikka, Paloniemi, please come and take the floor and present yourselves, because I had your presentation in my slide, but it's disappeared. So please, Riikka and Katriina will be chairing all the speakers today. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Okay. Hello, welcome from our side as well. My name is Riikka Paloniemi and I'm Unit Director in the Finnish Environment Institute there in SYKE. Our unit is called Social Change, yep. Sorry, Social Change, yes.
No surprise, I couldn't remember it.
I normally can, but sorry, yes. Katriina,
yes, good afternoon everyone. I'm Katriina Soini. I'm coming from Natural Resources Institute, where I'm working as a research professor and also a research manager in the field of resilient society. Nice to see you all, also familiar faces. Good to see you. Yes, so we have run through many different concepts and frameworks presented by Susanna, which in a way tells us that we have a common consensus that we need to have a systemic change in our society and way of living. And these concepts and frameworks also are something that are being used by everyone and in diverse ways, and sometimes they are even contradictory. And we thought that after we have been talking so much about transition, transformation, transformational adaptation, it's time to take a moment and discuss a little bit more in depth what do these concepts mean us and how we should go forward. And therefore we set us 3 questions for today. So how do these different conceptual underpinnings of transformation and other concepts currently look like for us? What kind of practical questions they have raised when they are used in the field in the practical research work, and then based on that, what kind of future we can envision for these concepts and maybe the related practices in the field. And the idea is that we have a kind of two different type of sessions. In the first one, we look more on these conceptual issues, and then we move on to more practical things, which might also reflect the conceptual and theoretical questions as well. And then summarize the key findings of these days in the end of the day. So this is the program, and I would like to now introduce the first speaker, who is Paula Kivimaa, coming from SYKE, as we have speakers from all these 3 organizations behind this session, SYKE and SYKE and HELSUS. So Paula is coming from SYKE, where she's working as a research professor in climate and society and as an academic of Finland Research Fellow. And her research ranges from very diverse topics, from climate to energy and environmental policy analysis, from the perspective of innovation, and she aims to examining change and stability in the energy and transport systems in particular. And she's also a member of the climate panel in Finland. So Paula, the floor is yours, and you may say a few more words about your topic today.
Okay. Thank you. I think I'm losing my voice just when I'm starting. So maybe I have to put it on the slideshow mode. I've described myself as a sustainability transition scholar because I've been working on this area after my PhD from about 2009, so about 15 years. And yeah, I'll be presenting you these ideas. So I'll start with an introduction and overview of sustainability transitions research field, and then focus on some of the there's a lot of conceptual development, but I'll just focus here on some of the recent concepts: disruption, destabilization, and decline, and then directionality and justice, and try to also draw some conclusions from the perspective of broader sustainability transformation research. So going ahead, and it was really nice to have the sort of start of presentation already on the Sustainable Development Goals, because what sustainability transitions essentially are about are addressing grand environmental and social challenges, such as the planetary boundaries or the Sustainable Development Goals. And this also makes, because the challenges are large, also the sustainability transitions are very complex and uncertain processes. And in this field, we often talk about socio-technical transitions. So there's an orientation to look at, for instance, how energy, mobility, food, water system, or different industrial systems are transitioning. And the word socio in the socio-technical means that essentially this is not about technological change, but this is also about actors doing things in new ways, changing their minds, underlying mindsets and routine practices, and gradually also the underlying institutional rules of the system. And here, changes in public policies and institutions are vital to catalyze the transitions, because there's such large magnitude of change, and often economic thinking prevails that it would not be possible, but public policy alone cannot change things. So there's also orientation to collaborations between businesses and civil society. As an academic research field, this started in the late 1990s in the Netherlands, and it's still predominantly a European research field. There are some scholars in North America, Africa and Asia that are interested, but primarily the community is based in Europe. It's an interdisciplinary social science research field, so there's kind of more people from different social science disciplines coming together, united by this aim to tackle initially fundamental environmental sustainability challenges, but also in more recent years there's been a focus on social challenges as well. There's a number of different conceptual frameworks, but a dominant one is what's called the multi-level perspective. So this kind of seeking to understand socio-technical system change through 3 levels. So on the one hand, how sustainability innovations are created and diffused. In this literature, we call them niches, or in other conceptual frameworks, they use the term technological innovation systems. Looking also then how the existing, often path-dependent and locked-in stable socio-technical regimes or systems, how could they be destabilized, what type of path dependencies and lock-ins exist, and then this influence of the broader context. And overall, what the different conceptual frameworks often share is this kind of division between artifacts, i.e. the technology and infrastructure, the actors, and then the institutions. But overall, there's this normative goal to improve the state of the affairs via research approaches and also the more practical tools generated. So there's a research stream, for instance, on transition arenas or urban living labs. And I'm going quite quick because I think we were quite strict on the 20-minute timeline. By the way, is someone going to show me when I have 5 minutes left? Okay, great. In 2019, we were asked, a group of us were asked to produce a report for the European Environment Agency to take stock of this research field. So and it resulted in a report called Sustainability Transitions Policy and Practice. It's over 100 pages, so it's quite dense. And if you're interested in this area, it's quite a nice collection of things as well to read. But in this report, we sort of try to identify characteristics of sustainability transitions. One is this multidimensional changes in socio-technical systems. So you're changing the technology, you're changing markets, policies and regulations, practices, even like trying to, obviously, essentially maybe the cultural associations made in this system. They're about multiple actors and multiple scales. So we're looking at changes from the urban to more global level. Importantly, they're about goal-oriented directionality. So for instance, the creation of new visions and identifying pathways to sustainability. There's also more to directionality, which I'll touch upon later. They are disruptive. So it's when you are doing these large-scale shifts, you inevitably some win, some lose from the system, and this also makes them to involve tensions and conflicts. They are open-ended and uncertain, so when we sort of try to advance them, we don't know where we'll end up, and therefore learning and experimentation continue to be important along the way. And then there's this aspect of there will be unintended consequences and surprises, emphasizing the importance of evaluation and reflection. And then at the same time, they're urgent, and we need kind of to accelerate some of the identified sustainability pathways. We need to phase out all unsustainable systems and so on. I wanted to show this. I'm also an associate editor in the journal of this field called Environmental and Societal Transitions. And a few years back, there was an exercise looking at how different frameworks, but also orientations were shown in the publications because the journal started in 2010. And what you see that in the beginning, there was already quite a strong presence of the conceptual frameworks, the MLP, so the multi-level perspective, and TIS, the technological innovation systems, also economics, but critical perspectives too. And when we look at the more recent publications, there's been quite a more orientation also to, for instance, business administration, political science, but at the same time, the frameworks are still being used in many of the articles. Why I find this field quite fascinating personally is that there's also been an increasing policy impact, and particularly the European Commission has been interested in the kind of findings and both the conceptualizations, but also the empirical findings from this field. I already mentioned the report we did for the EEA, and that fed into the European State of the Environment report in 2020. In, I think, 2023, the JRC published what's called a Playbook for Partnerships for Regional Innovation. Initially, it was called Smart Specialization for Sustainability, but many of the kind of fishes and tools it talks about come from the transitions field. And also in cohesion policy, this particular report is from 2020, supporting sustainability transitions. Cohesion policy, which is in charge of 1/3 of the EU.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jos ei se ala mitään hetkiä.
Can someone online comment, because I think the room dropped off. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Yes, cool. Okay, and let's hope the slide shows. Does that? Shall I continue with the main laptop because it shows here?
Yeah.
Still.
So then I don't stop sharing from here.
Yeah, I think we'll just to make it quicker. Yeah. So one expanding orientation is sort of focus on disruption, destabilization, exnovation, phase out, decline. I also think these are all kind of related terms related to sort of socio-technical regime change. There's also an orientation to deep and multi-system transitions, which I think is something that the sustainability transformation community has been doing for a while. So looking at parallel and intertwined shifts in multiple systems. Justice, there's a lot of increased attention on justice, and I will talk about this more later, both as a new directionality alongside environmental sustainability and as a broader repercussion of the unfolding transitions. Security and geopolitics of sustainability transitions is an opening that I have made recently, but also what's kind of really become to the fore is identifying the limitations of the traditional conceptual frameworks in this field, especially in global South context, which operates on slightly different rules. I'm a bit sort of, I think, if my presentation suffers because it's a bit confusing.
Should we put your yeah, then if we put like a letku into your, so that also the room would see it.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Maybe it's this one. Try that. And it needs to go to the other side.
This room, it seems to be a very unlucky room because every time.
The teams was just dropping out all the time.
And this morning as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm just navigating, but I still think it's rather than changing to my slideshow, I'll just continue with changing the slide here. Yeah, so focus on disruption, decline, destabilization, however you want to kind of frame the attempts for the old unsustainable systems to gradually crumble, it's due to two things, I think. One, on the one hand, we can see real world transitions, especially in the energy sector, advancing. So we have more empirical basis for this. But at the same time, we see that innovation only focused approaches are limited, and we need to kind of take more drastic action to destabilize unsustainable regimes. And there's this kind of different terms which have slightly different meanings. So for instance, in one paper, we describe disruption as an effect on the regime, whereas destabilization is perhaps more of a process. I'm not sure what the decline exactly is, or how, or is phase out more a policy goal as well as innovation. So I think there's a lot of room here also if somebody wants to dive into these more deeply. Shall I turn off the, now I think I'm back in the normal presentation mode. Okay. Let's I personally don't know anything about the technology in this room, so. So this picture is from a paper from Daniel Rosenblum and Adrian Rinscheid, and it was really taking stock on some of the concepts, not all of them, and it really kind of shows more like the dominance of the destabilization, but also kind of emergence interest in divestment, which is more perhaps like a financial term, and then phase out too. There was a paper in 2021 that I wrote with colleagues, Annika Lonkila, Minna Kaljonen, and Senja Laakso. So I say a few words about this. And here we just basically did a systematic review on how disruption was understood in this literature. And it kind of connects both to disruptive innovation, but as well as disrupting as a regime decline. And the innovation part really comes from innovation studies that have also fed to this literature. So looking at disruptive innovation via new production processes, reduced value of competencies, and sort of new types of value propositions. But then when we look at the system level, there's more, the literature really identifies disruption as a high intensity effect on the socio-technical system structure. So, and some people talk about more like a disruptive nature and speed of transition processes, and others talk more about the size of change, that it's so big that it's disruptive. So for these purposes of this paper, we decided to define it as a high intensity effect in the structure of the socio-technical system, demonstrated as long-term change in more than one dimensional element. So not only like just, for example, technology, but also technology and markets, or markets and regulations. And here we also had in this article, if you're interested, you can sort of read it in more detail, but we kind of differentiated between gradual change and rapid change, and large change and small change. And certainly something that's gradual and small, we would say it's non-disruptive. But then, whereas rapid large change is more like characterized by discontinuity breakdown of the whole system, which might be induced, for instance, in radical shocks, such as we've seen in the last few years. And then more gradual change is more associated with transformation and subtle reconfiguration of the whole system. So I have 5 minutes left, so I only say very quickly that what we also noted, that as a phenomena, it's unpredictable and undomesticated. You often think disruption in many contexts is a negative word, but here I guess we see it more positively, as if it's happening for environmental sustainability, but it might still have negative consequences from other perspectives. And then empirical research is really kind of emphasizing reconfiguration and restabilization as alternative to regime disruption. So actually in the real world, for instance, we see after the war started in Ukraine, we see a restabilization of fossil energy regimes in some countries. I guess I'll just say very quickly that, okay, in one paper we proposed 3 processes of regime decline because there weren't such processes. One would be kind of disruption and repurposing skills and assets. So the transition really reduces the value of some incumbent skills. There might be a weaker flow of resources to all key technologies, while some skills could be repurposed in new contexts, such as using skills in offshore oil and gas to offshore wind, for instance. I like the term unlearning really much, and it was nice to see in the previous presentation. So I think this process of unlearning and deep learning is really vital, that we're not only learning new things, but we're really consciously not acting in old ways, questioning our values and norms and letting go of old ineffective habits. And then this idea of deinstitutionalization, eroding legitimacy to the existing regime, changes in underlying interest and power relations and institutional structures, and replacing some key actors. And there's also like potential for linking sustainability, transformation and transitions research, for instance, shifting paradigms of animal production and consumption. So now the final few slides, there's been increased emphasis on directionality, because yes, we know we are aiming for environmental and social sustainability, but it's more than visions and expectations. It's more than the sustainable development goals. In practice, we need to be more specific about what is it exactly. Some people talk about making decisions on the prioritization of different values, so economic growth, ecological sustainability, and social welfare. But it's also about emphasizing the new social paradigms such as degrowth, sufficiency, and well-being. But I still think as a field, becoming more concrete about what directionality is in a given situation, each given situation is difficult. Key challenges are also this what's called socio-technical multiplicity. So different pathways are pursued by different actor coalitions, and they might be competing. And appraisal diversity, how we actually understand sustainability, how ambitious change are we aiming at, and how disruptive can it be. So I think these are the key challenges. So there's also this orientation to policy intervention points. The first three are more like, okay, how do we stimulate, accelerate innovations? How do we destabilize the regimes? But what's really welcome is this attention to repercussions of regime destabilizations and questions of justice, coordinating the transitions that are happening on related systems, and this what's called landscape tilt. And then just wanted to highlight this justice attention, and then Minna and Annika and other colleagues have really done a lot of work on this. And this kind of links research on environmental, social, and energy justice to transitions. It was really a substantive track in the last International Sustainability Transitions Conference. There's so many interesting sessions. It's also a new thematic group for the Sustainability Transitions Research Network, so if you're interested in it. And its key orientations really are justice as a normative goal, just transition as a political process, attention to social justice and vulnerable groups, as well as kind of really this increasing awareness of global justice and decolonization. I had to go very quickly since my time is running out. Just wanted to end by sort of both identifying key strengths of the transitions research, which I think should be continued in the future, but also new openings. So what I like about this field is it has a really strong orientation to conceptual insights, frameworks, and theories, which both informs the empirical research and is informed by it. But I think these frameworks have also been useful, for instance, to policy audiences. It really embraces kind of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches. We're like open to new inputs. It also, I think, pays attention to solid reporting of research methods. So it kind of aims for accuracy as well as the strong policy ties in different continents. But also the new openings, I like those. There's increased diversity and perspectives and inputs from research fields. So we're really moving on to beyond the 4 conceptual frameworks. I think now what comes more to the fore is the messiness of transitions in the real world and more moral, ethical viewpoints, because the early transitions were more like, I'm studying this technological change and that's sustainable. So it's really about the current research more questions the sustainability of transitions themselves, sort of identifying these broader repercussions that, for instance, energy transitions might have. And then I think it's really bringing the transitions field closer to the sustainability transformation field.
Wonderful question. For a few minutes. It's not that
Oh,
easy.
sorry, I thought we were taking both presentations first and then questions.
Well, yeah, we would first like to stop here
Okay.
for 5 minutes and a few questions. So great, thanks a lot for these presentations. I think it gave us a really broad view of what's going on and what are the key concepts that are being discussed now and then maybe in the near future even more. Personally, I was impressed when you said that some of these frameworks have already adapted by the policymakers, because I think as sustainability scientists we really want to make a difference in policy, not just discuss among us. So good to hear those news. But we could take a couple of questions from the audience, and Riikka will bring the mic. So first from there, please. And could you just briefly introduce yourself, just your name and organization.
Hello, 1, 2, 3. Hi, Taneli Vaskalainen, Ruralia Institute, University of Helsinki. Thanks, Paula, for excellent work in summarizing 30 years of transition studies in 20 minutes. I was wondering, how do you see the relationship between disruption and decline? Because I'd argue that we've seen a disruption in, for example, energy sector. We've seen the rise of wind, we've seen the rise of solar. But I'm not sure we are seeing decline of the old system. We've seen oil and gas companies doubling down actually on their earlier convictions to change their business, and we have seen their stock prices actually rise as a consequence. And there are sort of supports, on the other side of the Atlantic on the old regime. So I mean, I was wondering whether disruption actually leads to decline or to parallel systems.
Yeah. I think that, where's the mic now, by the way, so the audience. Okay, it's here. We've also had problems with the mic in this room, that's why I was asking. Yeah, I think it is very good comments. And I think, yeah, decline is probably more an empirically observable or something that we're looking at the status, although of course decline can also be reversed. But yeah, you're true that maybe disruption is more, like we said, it's an effect on the regime, but it maybe then in relation status is more, the decline is more the status. And of course, empirically, we see, like, for instance, the COVID pandemic was a huge disruption to many systems, but people, like then things were turning back to normal. And I think actually, that's why I brought up the term restabilization, because what we see in the energy, because there's an X curve of transitions, which I didn't now talk about, but it's like showing the new system emerging and the old system declining. What we're actually seeing now in the energy transitions, that yes, we're seeing wind power, we're seeing electrification rising, but we're also seeing kind of a restabilization of the fossil system. So there might not actually be an X curve, and the real world is much more complicated, and this might apply to other systems too. So I think the ideal transition is certainly differs from the empirically observable ones, and we might need new tools to address these problems that you brought forward.
Thank you. And then we have a second question.
I would just like to start with this. This could be a question to all the speakers, because you're all sustainability experts, but there's like PhD researcher in the University of Helsinki called Sakari Saunioki, and he has been giving us lectures on a course about the decline of fossil fuels, not like the downshift of them to mitigate climate change, but that actually there is not enough of them, and how renewable energy is dependent largely on fossil fuels and our food production system, and this doesn't seem to be talked about at all. So I'm not sure if what Sakari says has any legitimacy. That means that fossil fuels availability is declining, and that it could be more foundational sustainability transformation maybe than even climate change or biodiversity loss or whatever. Just wondering if you know anything about this, because this is like Sakari Saunioki is this person who does this, and it's been fully transformational for me to learn about the fossil base of our society, and I think it like in some years or at least decades the fossil fuel use will decline because it's not available anymore. There's limited amount of oil and gas and coal on the ground. So
yeah, I mean I think that has always been a topic as well in the energy sector, but at the same time humans seem to be capable of inventing more efficient ways to, because it's about how much fossil fuels can you actually extract from the soil, and I think shale gas, for instance, is a development that kind of shows that okay, humans are capable also, like we think there's a certain amount, but then that can be extracted, but it's actually might not be diminishing to the degree if we see, unfortunately, humans. But yeah, that's one consideration. But I think I've seen varying estimates of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that we need to move on to the next presentation because of the time. And I now give the floor to Riikka and Riina.
Yep, thank you. And I think I really much appreciate this discussion. Let's take time to discuss. We are here together, so that's the most important part. But really wonderful presentation by Paula, and we will hear next Riina Bathia, who is a researcher from VTT, Technical Research Center of Finland and University of Helsinki. Riina's work focuses on post-growth sustainable transformation in global north and global south, and perhaps this post-growth was one of the themes that Paula did not mention. There were so many themes in her presentation. Riina builds her work on international political economy and political ecology, development studies, peace and conflict research, and inclusive and just sustainable transformations. And now Riina's title is From Ecological Crisis to a Global Just Sustainable Transition, Feminist and Postcolonial Perspective. Thanks, Riina.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be able to speak to you. Thanks for coming. I think it's a wonderful thing to have such an audience online as well as live. Like you said, I'm Riina Bathia and I come from VTT. I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Helsinki, and I'm conducting my research in a project called To Be, Horizon Europe project on sustainable well-being economies. And there I focus specifically on a case study in Ecuador that we are conducting with indigenous communities, and we're trying to understand what are the sort of innovations and technologies that take place in an economy that doesn't necessarily try to pursue growth. So sort of adopting these indigenous epistemologies, but post-growth, and how they link with innovations and sustainability. I'm trying to present to you two sort of big discussions, which is the post-colonial and feminist perspectives in 20 minutes. So obvious is that I will not be able to go through everything, but we have time to continue the discussion later on. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm very happy to try to answer them. So like I said, this is the structure of my presentation. I'll first give you the argument, and then we'll have two content slides on the feminist perspective and the post-colonial perspective. And I will be arguing also in this presentation that the synergy of those two theories are something that will drive us perhaps to more socially just and ecologically sound transformations. If we have time, I will go through the examples, a couple of examples from my ongoing research, one dealing with the case study in Ecuador, and the other one dealing with questions and notions of innovations and technologies stemming from post-growth literature. And then finally, I'll conclude the presentation. So it is daunting to do this in 20 minutes. I hope I will manage. Let's see. I was thinking yesterday, what is the actual argument of my presentation that I want to present to you? And this sentence came to my mind. And perhaps many of you have heard it before. So, for the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring a genuine change. This statement is expressed by an American author, radical feminist, professor, and civil rights activist Audre Lorde in her essay, Master's Tool Will Never Take Down the Master's House. This was a critique towards the liberal feminist discourse and research. For that, they disregarded how gender, race, social class can be implicated as categories contributing to inequalities faced by women of color at the time in the United States. The main essay, the essence of this essay was to intervene in the processes of knowledge production that marginalized, invalidated, and erased women from experiencing multiple forms of marginalization in the society. And why this is the main argument of my presentation? Well, I argue that without taking into consideration the feminist and decolonial perspectives, sustainability transitions are in the risk of doing the same, and that these perspectives are important to create a truly sustainable transition. So to break down this argument that mainstream sustainability transitions are based on and threaten to deepen existing inequalities, be they gendered inequalities or colonial inequalities. There is a need to engage more with the feminist and post-colonial perspectives to avoid this. And I think Paula already highlighted that these are the certain rising currents within the research. This emerges from the fact that sustainability transitions are inherently political. They are shaped by visions of the future, and they include winners and losers, as was highlighted by Paula also. Knowledge and different positionalities determine visions for sustainability. Traditionally, sustainability transitions research especially focuses on the socio-technical change, and from a capitalist perspective. This also lacks the gendered and post-colonial applications. Also, interestingly, and what I'm looking at in my research is the role of technological innovations in sustainability transitions. Historically, technological innovations have been both a key component in economic growth as well as for the solutions to the ecological destruction caused by economic growth. However, these both have serious socio-ecological implications, such as deepening the biodiversity loss and social displacement. As also highlighted by Paula, there is a rising debate on the directionality of sustainability transitions, and there is this debate on green growth versus post-growth that I will not go too much into play, but it is sort of an important perspective because it approaches and suggests that instead of only approaching sustainability transitions from the technical perspective, we need alternative economic models and notions of innovations for sustainability. And here, the synergy between post-colonial and feminist perspectives offer pathways to both ecologically sound and socially just transitions. And for me and my reading, these two theories really invite us to ask the vital question that what is sustainability and for whom? With what benefits and harms, for whom, and with what consequences? So to go through the first perspective, which is the feminist, I focus on the gendered relations in transition dynamics and their sustainability orientations. These could be tied to the structural, symbolic, and behavioral dimensions and analyses. And relating to these, I highlight the three main perspectives that are masculinities in transitions, the gendered impacts of transitions, and epistemological injustices that drive sustainability transition, and especially the visions on that, and then the behavioral analysis on how some sustainable or unsustainable practices are gendered and contribute to building gender identities in the society. So on the masculinities of transitions, it is argued that the centrality of technological innovations versus social change contributes to the genderedness of sustainability transitions. There's a research by Krunzel and others in Sweden where they looked at, or they did a feminist analysis of Sweden's transition policy visions, and they observed how they are structured genderly, and how energy transition symbolism is closely tied to the masculine ontology. This means that the male norm was embedded in transition policies, emphasizing industrial and technological shifts over behavioral change. For example, the masculine norm, like high energy consumption or private car use, are not questioned. On the gendered impacts and epistemologies, this relates to the questions of masculine knowledges, norms, and which sectors play a key role in transitions. Meanwhile, technology-focused policies overlook perspectives of women and minorities. This relates to the division of labor and technological culture, especially in energy transition, which are seen to favor masculine expertise and skews resource distribution and decision-making away from both women and minority groups in the society. Emma Lamberg and I we wrote a review article in Poliittinen talous in the beginning of this year, and we highlighted in the article how, for example, in Finland, transition policies are primarily viewed from the technology and industry perspectives, and these sectors remain heavily male-dominated, and hence they skew also the decision-making and influence of female-dominated sectors in that. for example, leaving out the questions of care and unpaid care in the society. Then the behavioral analysis focuses on how certain practices are sustainable or unsustainable and how these are gendered, meaning that they construct gender identities in the society. So this term petromasculinity, I don't know if some of you are aware of that, but is a great term to describe how practices that we see as inherently unsustainable tie with sort of gender practice or gender identity, and hence become also difficult to dismantle or descale altogether. And Haltman argues here that many transition visions are based on partly ecological modernization, and which does not deeply address the sustainability contradictions that are inherent in the capitalist growth paradigm, such as ecological destruction, colonial power structures, or gender inequalities, but rather maintain the gendered and global inequalities and hierarchies. And he argues that the unsustainable practices, such as private car owning, ties with masculine identity and thus is seen as a gender identity building. But given the centrality or the importance of gendered analysis, it's also found that between 2010 and 2020, only 17 contributions to the field show theoretical engagement with gender as an analytical category. Then on the post-colonial perspective, I highlight here three main issues, which is the historical and ongoing colonialization and colonialism as the root cause of ecological destruction, the inequalities and extractivism, and knowledges and alternative visions for sustainability. It is seen that colonialism is the root cause contributing to the establishment of global capitalism, but also then the ecological destruction that follows, and hence the need for sustainability transitions altogether go back to colonialism. Global inequalities and experiences on unequal change and extractivism drive both climate change and the responses to it. It's often said that energy transitions in the north drive extractivism in the south. This deepens the existing and drives new forms of gendered inequalities, for example, through land grabbing and environmental injustices. And I don't know if many of you are aware or familiar with the Environmental Justice Atlas, but it depicts the ongoing and past environmental conflicts in the world. And if you see that, the distribution of global environmental conflicts center in the global south, and especially on indigenous lands, but also in the north in indigenous lands. Then about the knowledge, it's a bit what I highlighted also in the feminist perspective, is that it essentially engages with the question of epistemology. So what is the desired pathway and what is sustainability? The post-colonial perspectives today critique the sort of mainstream sustainability transformations as adopting this pathway of development as modernization, and they critique it that this is inherently unsustainable. This stems or emerges from the post-development discourses that critique sort of also sustainable development goals for lacking engagement and perspectives stemming from the pluriverse, so from the grassroots levels in Global South, especially from communities that are not centered around the growth economies, for example. Here, the decolonizing sustainability transitions calls for alternative visions and knowledges in transitions. They seek sustainable pathways to economic development from local sort of bottom-up grassroots perspectives. And interestingly, this discussion also ties with the notion of innovations and technologies, and calls for decolonizing innovation and engaging more with traditional or indigenous knowledges for sustainability or traditional practices that have been in place before social displacement or possible social displacement emerging from technological shifts. So then the theoretical synergy of adopting both feminist and decolonial research in conjunction addresses the systematic inequalities in global economy and transition, both from a gendered and colonial perspectives. The systematic inequalities in global economy drive the sustainability transitions in the north, but impedes it in the south. This highlights that the economic inequalities from colonial history with an ongoing exploitation between the north and the south. North's wealth has historically been dependent on extractive practices in the south, including resource exploitation and cheap labor. And this results that the sustainability transitions in the north are impossible with resources used and needed from the south, but also that these historical dependencies impede sustainability transitions happening in the south. For example, because of historical debt that has been sort of compiling in the global south. Relating to this point, the unequal experience of impact and climate change and extractivism is one of those sort of critical points that feminist and post-colonial research would look at. These highlight that the extractive economies drive overconsumption and ecological destructions, and they are unequally experienced, often by marginalized communities in the global south, but also sometimes in the global north, as I mentioned, through what we would call sacrificing zones. The theoretical synergy helps us to look at how the sustainability transitions are both gendered, but include racial exploitation and exclusion. Okay, so I'm running out of time. This is an example that we looked or from the field. I will just really quickly highlight that this is based on the case study. It's still ongoing. The data analysis has been more or less done now. But here we looked at how the communities in the northern Andean region fulfill basic needs or social provisioning in a non-capitalist and non-exploitative system. We highlight that there is a more than technology focus. There is an engagement with local knowledges, materials, and practices. They are focused on fulfilling basic needs. And at the same time, they try to enhance the autonomy and agency of local communities versus approaching transitions or sustainable practices through technocracy and top-down approaches. However, we've also done several interviews with the ministerial level in Ecuador, as well as with universities and innovation agencies. But in higher level of decision-making, these knowledges are still not seen as valid for sustainability, but rather the sort of high-level decision-making emphasizes technological innovations and economic growth. But I will not have time, unfortunately, to go into the details with this. This is just to highlight. I'll give you the slides after this, so you can look at, but this is the sort of post-growth perspective on innovations, and really it questions the sort of power and agency who decides on what is being innovated, what are the principles and ownership models behind it, and how they drive towards sustainability. But since I'm running out of time, I'll just quickly conclude that these critical perspectives invite us to think of alternatives to the mainstream sustainability transitions. These theoretical frames that I presented to you emphasize not only socio-technical change, but socio-cultural transformations. And these approaches advocate from shifting from high consumption and high production economies to more sustainable economies that reduce both emissions and resource consumption in a socially just manner. And challenging the colonial and epistemic violence of transition policies requires moving towards epistemological and ontological diversity, or pluriversality, as it's also called. Colleagues like Kothari and others also emphasize the need for multi-perspective sustainability transitions, rejecting the hegemonic Western development paradigm. According to them, the mainstream Eurocentric sustainability transition is only one of the many visions for a sustainable future economy. They present existing grassroots alternatives for sustainable living, such as the Latin American indigenous philosophy of Buen Vivir or Summa Causae, which aims for good living within an ecological ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Riina, for this important and really topical talk, because in the Colombia, they were in COP meeting, biodiversity meeting, they were discussing the same things. What about global north and global south, how to do agreements, agree about future of biodiversity, global biodiversity, and how to fund global and south things, how we share these things, really important. Now I would like to give this opportunity for you to comment or ask questions. Maybe here are a couple of questions. Yes, here is one. Wonderful.
Thanks for the presentation. I wanted to ask, in the case of Ecuador, you were talking about this way of kind of redistributing some of the economic gains to everyone. So have you looked into cases of the universal basic income being implemented in different countries, and whether that could be a way to go forward, thinking about also the social perspective? In addition to these technological innovations? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I personally have been engaged more with this very local level example or local level case in Ecuador, but in the project the Global North cases are specifically looking at questions like universal basic income, but they approach it rather from the perspective of the well-being economy. That is another framework that I would describe belongs to the sort of post-growth realm of things along with donut economy. But there they look at the social or policy innovations also for resource redistribution, but also how these mechanisms such as universal basic income or universal basic services could reduce the sort of growth dependency in societies. But yeah, personally I have not been looking. Great question.
Yep, thanks. Any other questions or comments?
If there are others, I would like others to go ahead. You go ahead.
Ville, so how would you see, like, just from Western perspective, there the growth is the problem with consuming resources. So, like, I think if we would want to have climate change mitigation according to the Paris Agreement or something like this, I heard it somewhere that we should have 8 times more reduction in the economy than what we had in 2008 and 9 financial crisis to hit the carbon target. So how do you see this, like, degrowth? Because that is what you're researching happening in the Western world.
Yeah, if I get your question right, is that what is my opinion on degrowth?
Yeah, in the Western world.
In the Western world. Well, that is essentially what is needed because we are overshooting the planetary boundaries, right? So in order to come back to the planetary boundaries, it needs reduction of production and consumption. And this entails obviously also resource redistribution between the north and the south, because there are regions in the south where basic needs are not fulfilled yet. So in order to be socially just, it also needs to have this component. How degrowth will happen, there's several different papers and books analyzing strategy, economic planning. There's more and more also literature engaging with industrial policy or economic planning in general. But I think it is sort of a multi-level and multifaceted transformation that happens in the society, but also requiring a sort of profound change in the mindsets to start with. So, yeah.
Did you have more time? Yeah, I was interested because, so I'm Eva Primer from SYKE, where Riikka is from as well. Yeah, thanks a lot. It's really important that we have these global considerations, or in a way, but it is also at the same time a bit of a pity that we do it via the global role division type. That, yeah. So my question is that when we have this kind of cases that you have studied in Ecuador, and we often, in a way, get these cases of living in harmony with nature. I'm also very familiar with the biodiversity context that Riikka mentioned in the terminology and so on. Living in harmony with nature in a global south context, in a fairly poorly resourced, or people, like you said, that they can't, even basic needs cannot be met. Is the idea that we are scaling up this kind of close to living in harmony with nature type ideas, so that we, in a way, diffuse those ideas to other societies? Or is there, or is the idea more this what was challenged just then, that we would, like, in a way, disrupt the capitalist economies and reorganize them? So what is the, in a way, the transition idea that drives this kind of approaches that you are applying in your research?
Sorry that I'm so
Yeah. Well, I'll try to summarize in 1 or 2 minutes. That is a great question. And one of the challenges also, because these are hugely different contexts. We are highly industrial or even post-industrialized country with a division of labor. And this case that we present, or we have been studying, the centrality of food production is, for example, the sort of basis of the social provisioning, but also the labor. It combines unpaid and paid labor. There is short periods of time where these communities engage in wage labor, for example. So in order to transmit or even think that that sort of taking this as an example and introducing it to the global north cases would be very hard. Nevertheless, it's sort of important to understand what are the mechanisms of providing social provisioning in a system that isn't based on growth. And for me, it seems that it would engage sort of shifting production forces more towards food production and the sort of basic essentialities, adopting different types of labor and sharing mechanisms that don't necessarily operate so only based on the sort of markets, that there is a rather a diverse of economic activities that is happening. And if we can learn something from there, what is the mechanisms for social provisioning when the market economy is not the primary distributor of goods and services? These could be some of the learnings that we can do that. But yes, thank you for the question.
Now we move on in the program towards more practical observations and experiences from the field, how these concepts that have been discussed so far are operationalized in the practical research and empirical research. And the first speaker will be Jani Salminen from Finnish Environment Institute, and he will talk about quantifying sustainability transition. And I didn't know you before, but when I was looking at the list of publications you had, and I realized that you have been working on so many different topics and concepts, from food to water and circular economic plastic and whatever. So really quite experienced in this field. And I would also like to remind us that although we have been talking mostly so far about how to enable the transition and transformation, it's really a crucial thing to understand the systems that we are actually talking about. And this is exactly what Jan is, I guess, going to tell us how is the world look like from that perspective. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. I'm surprised to see so many people here, so I'm very pleased to have you all here and also online.
Yes.
So I'm trying to give you some ideas how we are quantitating sustainability transformation at SYKE. And okay, this is already the first slide. So my first question is, why are we doing this? Why is it relevant? And then I move on to how we do it, and finally I have some examples. Unfortunately, the time limitation is today such that there is no opportunity to go into details in any of my examples. So maybe you may find them kind of interesting in the sense that they are related to food. But let's see how it goes. So what we have already heard today is that if we want to achieve a more sustainable society in Finland and globally, we need quite drastic changes, both in the way how we consume and how we produce the goods and services that we are consuming. And here we are talking about system level changes, and that's why we also need tools that are able to really kind of look into system level look into the system level of different systems like food system, energy systems, and how they are also integrated or intertwined. So our interest has been to look at the systemic view, both from the sides of consumption and production, because we can, if we want to try to achieve more sustainable societies, we can influence both the ways how we consume, but also how we produce the goods that we are consuming. And so that's what we want to do simultaneously. And then, as you have heard already today, there are several aspects of sustainability that we need to kind of be able to analyze at the same time. There are the environmental aspects of sustainability, but then there is also the social questions and, of course, economic questions as well. And our tools should be able to somehow tackle all of these aspects to be kind of applicable to sustainability of systems. And then if we focus on the environmental sustainability, we know that there are kind of different environmental burdens related to climate change, use of water, water pollution, biodiversity. And sometimes the sustainability change may be such that they are kind of have a positive impact on all of these, but we don't know it for sure. So that's why we need to, our tools need to be such that we can kind of study all of these relevant aspects of environmental sustainability at the same time. And then finally, as I've now listed you a lot of things that we would kind of expect from such models, the basic, very basic idea is that we really need tools that are able to look at complexities within the systems and also the related trade-offs and how the different systems like food systems and energy systems, for instance, are dependent on each other. And when we do so, we can then inform different stakeholders, policy planning, or monitoring of different policies with our data. So how we are approaching this kind of complexity and modeling of the systems and their sustainability? Well, our approach is environmentally extended input-output modeling. There are other ways, of course, to approach this, but we are doing this with this kind of set of models, and I'm of course talking about these. So what they basically are is economic models. They are kind of describing how our economy is organized, and then we are linking the environmental impacts or burdens to the structure of economy. And when I'm talking about economies, it's kind of a picture of the how we are producing the goods and how we are consuming them, and how the different actors, like for instance, industries, are dependent on each other. And that's how we describe how the interactions between the economy. And this can be done in different scales. We can start from a national scale, then we can go even to a global scale, and then narrow it down to a kind of regional scale. And we are linking different kind of environmental burdens, as I already told you, and there is a list of these burdens that we are addressing in our model. And then instead of having one type of model or one model, we have a set of models that are intended for different purposes. And I am most familiar with environment food system models, so my examples are also dealing with that. Okay, then there are some examples of our research questions I'm not going into details of these, but this may kind of elucidate to you how we are approaching, how we are quantitating sustainable transformation. So first, of course, there are very basic questions about to what extent different goods and services have environmental impacts, and then how they are formed in the production chains. Then we are interested how our consumption, if we are calculating our environmental burdens based on the consumption, we can kind of sum them up. Or then we can look at from the production side so that we can have the calculation from these both angles. Then we can make comparisons between the different industries and different products. And looking into very kind of the details, if we are interested, for instance, the justice implications of a transformation, we can narrow it down to a farm level. And I have one example of that. And then looking more into the transition aspect of this, we can make different kinds of what-if scenarios. So for instance, if Finnish people are changing the way they are eating, our diets are changing, then we are able to look into how our kind of consumption-based emissions are changing, or how the food industries, agriculture, what kind of pressures this kind of a change would create to these industries. And then we can also make scenarios like the energy transformation that is ongoing. How does that impact our food systems and the emissions from them? Okay, there I have one example. So I'm not going through in a detail, but this kind of gives you maybe an idea why it is very important to look at these things in a systematic level. You have probably heard very often that we can have a great impact on the kind of environmental sustainability by eating the way we eat. But the food systems emissions are very dependent on the land use. And that's why if we are not doing anything with land use sector and the emissions from organic soils, in fact, we are not getting much done with the emission reduction. So here we have kind of two different scenarios, or three different scenarios. This is our starting point. And here we can see that if we are reducing the meat and milk product consumption by 1/3 by 2035, we don't get much difference in the compared to the reference scenario where the energy systems are already expected to change. But instead, if we are doing kind of actions in the land use sector, we are getting much more emission reductions. So that's why it's important to not only look at how we eat and then be surprised at why didn't the emissions go down when they are in fact more dependent on land use and its emissions than the way we eat alone. Another examples I have chosen pig meat because it's kind of a very concrete example. So these are the chains or the kind of different phases of the production. And this is like the end product, and here is the manufacturing of the processed meat. So we can see that very small part of the emissions actually come from the manufacturing industry. So if they are start to use solar panels instead of burning oil, it doesn't have so much difference in the overall emissions. But then when we look at the kind of the emissions from the animals, and especially about what they are eating, we are seeing that much more has to happen in the agricultural sector. So this is also very important for the industries to understand what is kind of relevant if they are pursuing carbon neutrality or try to cut their emissions. And very much they are typically focusing on their own actions and not looking kind of a deeper in the goods that they are using or their kind of intermediary products. And then finally, I have a kind of a set of recommendations what should be done. And I'm running out of time, so I'm not reading them aloud here, but I just pick one, which kind of highlights, as I promised, the kind of justice aspects of this kind of models that they can also kind of provide information about. So we run our data through and find out that there are roughly 70% of farms that are not much dependent on organic yields, which are kind of our main target if we want to reduce the emissions from our food systems. But then there are kind of a small amount of farms that are very dependent on this kind of actions or policies. And they are almost entirely cultivating organic soils. So if our policies are targeting organic soils and we are trying to get rid of them so that no longer food is grown on organic soils, we know that it's very kind of there are certain farms that have no kind of a future at all. And these are vulnerable groups. We know that there is this kind of a set of farms. And then 70% of the farms are not so much affected, which also gives us the idea that the Finnish food production as such is not kind of threatened, but there are certain set of farms that are very much kind of threatened by these kind of policies. Okay.
Thank you, Jani.
I suppose I exceeded my time.
Yep, you did it. But thank you a lot. Thank you. I think that now we continue with Annukka's presentation because we can then have more time to discuss based on your presentation, Annukka's presentation and Linda's presentation. It will be more comfortable combine your perspectives and our questions and comments. So our next speaker is Professor of Sustainable Behavior Change, and that was what I was thinking in the beginning, and Annukka Vainio from HELSUS Institute. Annukka's professorship is located at the Department of Forest Sciences at the University of Helsinki here in Viikki. And building on Annukka, your present expertise on social psychology, you have explored sustainability in various contexts. And as Jani, you have many contexts and studies and fields. For example, food, forest ownership, climate agency, climate policy, and bats. You have been analyzing moral, values, justice, and gender questions. And this is really interesting. And now we will hear the presentation with the title Cultivating a Sustainability Mindset. Thank you, Annukka.
Thank you. How to make it Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here to talk. And I am a social psychologist and professor of sustainable behavior change. So what I'm talking here is from the perspective that how to make sustainable, have success in sustainable behavior change as part of sustainability transformation. And I was asked to provide some notions from the field, so these are really some kind of field notes and my field observations, and also because I'm a social psychologist, so I have been also observing you researchers also when you talk about sustainability transformation. And I have observed that people have, citizens, consumers, also researchers, they have very different kinds of visions about sustainability transformation, that what it should look like, but also that some people also, or quite many people actually, they show quite much skepticism that is it going to succeed or not. And
and they also even doubt that that they already have quite strong image that future is going to be a certain kind of future, and they are quite skeptical that this future path can be changed. And they, for example, some people also tend to underestimate, for example, the prevalence of environmental concern among people, or they might even overestimate the prevalence of, for example, environmental denialism. So I have been, I have been a bit puzzled about this kind of some kind of hopelessness, and also it's some kind of it is not even backed by evidence, and what kind of impact it can have, on how sustainability transformation is going to look like, because in social psychology we have lots of research about the power of expectations. That people have certain kind of expectations that how something will turn out in future, and we invest our energy on that, and actually then that our expectation tends to become an experience. And there's also this self-fulfilling prophecy. Which there is really evidence that that so if we feel that we are going to fail, we don't put in enough effort, and we are not as successful as if we are having more confidence in what we are going to do. And here is another conceptual model today. Model that I like to use. It is a 3 spheres of transformation. From behavior change perspective, it describes that there are this kind of not only behavior change perspective, but that transformation consists of 3 different spheres, and actually the point is that there should be interactions between these spheres. So there should not be only change in behavior, because it's not going to probably be successful if we do not take into account also the political sphere, and also most importantly the personal sphere. Which is usually quite much overlooked, but actually it has really huge impact on how we think about policies and behaviors. For example, we might, or policymakers or anybody might think that some solutions are not possible. So that is already a big barrier to transformation. And of course, it's not easy. That this personal sphere is very important, and alone that we cannot only think that it's enough to change people's beliefs, because then it remains too abstract. We also have to target people's behaviors, and the challenge is that that we, at least in our democratic society, we cannot indoctrinate people to change their beliefs or values. So it has to go through voluntary changes by maybe some forerunner individuals or activist individuals, who want to explore some change of beliefs or engage in critical thinking, or some transformative educational system. Here are some examples of mindset barriers, some beliefs that might actually slow down transformation, such as systemic transformation is not possible, or behavior change is difficult, or reducing the carbon footprint will make our life miserable, or that people are not willing to change, or that people have information deficit, so let's pour more information on them. And actually, self-efficacy is one example of mindset barrier, and I will talk some more about this self-efficacy. It's a concept coming from social psychology, and there is a huge amount of decades of research and evidence of this concept, that how it is actually extremely powerful in in making people engage in environmental behavior. Of course, I'm not saying actually the most important factor in changing people's behavior is actually changing their living environments and enabling behavior, but this self-efficacy is also quite strong if we want to focus on the mindset barriers. And the problem here that there is in the context of environmental action, so there is lots of evidence that actually people have quite low level of perceived efficacy. People feel that they alone, their individual behavior can have very little difference on resolving global problems, and they feel quite overwhelmed and anxious and depressed. So, I mean that our job is then to somehow to link, this self-efficacy to this systemic environmental efficacy. So then there is this research about, how concretely to build this environmental efficacy. To people notice, for example, pro-environmental behaviors that they are already doing, and demonstrate confidence in people's ability to reach pro-environmental goals, which is often not happening, and not to medicalize negative emotions, and emphasize benefits of pro-environmental behavior, not to describe them as sacrifices. And here is one example of this kind of non-profit research institute that has taken step in this constructive communication, because communication is very important in changing mindsets, because they are actually media researchers, and because the media is quite problem oriented, and they maybe when they communicate they focus a lot on describing the problem, but they don't then give enough space to the solution. So they want to balance problem statements with proposed solutions, and there is already evidence that actually that is quite nice approach in the context of climate change, for example. Yes. Okay. Actually, yeah. But okay, my slides ended. But then what I wanted to say that sustainability mindset has been regarded as an important research topic, but often it has been studied a bit apart. But it should be actually always studied as part of technical and policy transformation. And all sustainability researchers should be minding about the mindsets and also be critical of their own mindsets too, because it determines what we also conceive as truths or what we conceive as possible. And it's also very important because we are sustainability researchers, so we are some kind of change agents. And as we heard, that policymakers also listen to us, citizens do listen to us. So it's very important how we describe environmental problems. So we should also remember to talk about also the solutions and not only the problems. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Annukka. Great things to learn again, and we will come back to those in the joint discussion then with the three speakers from this latter session. And now I would like to introduce the next speaker, Linda Rosengren from SYKE, Natural Resources Institute, and Linda defended her PhD this year, wasn't it? And it was about leverage point approach in the global south, more specifically in Ghana, and you were looking at the food system. And now you are going to talk a little bit on the same topic, but the case is from the Western Nepal. And I would also like to say that Linda is an academic researcher, but she's also very interesting background. She has worked for United Nations FAO organization and also in many international NGOs. So she really knows what the science looks like from different perspectives. So the floor is yours, Linda.
Thank you.
Or you can.
So, good afternoon. I have the pleasure to give the last presentation, so please bear with me. So, today I want to present to you our work in Nepal in relation to resilience building and food system transformation. And this is part of a project called GREAT that is funded by European Union and Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And this is a manuscript that we submitted yesterday to Ambio, so keep fingers crossed. So before I go into the theoretical stuff and our empirical findings, yeah, it's on purpose still there.
I wanted to just say a couple of words about Nepal because I think it's a really interesting country to study transformation in. It's situated in the Himalayas and there's glacier melting, so this is really impacting. It's the water tower of a great share of the population of our planet. So it's China, India, Southeast Asia that are impacted, and you can also see these impacts in Nepal through droughts and floods. There's also a new constitution that devolves the government to a local level or to the municipality level. Particularly in Western Nepal, there is a high rate of migration. So able young men are leaving to India, they're leaving to Gulf countries, everywhere in the world. And this means that the people that are still there, it's mainly women, so you have a lot of female-headed households. Yeah, there's a question if there's communities that are going to be there 10 years from now. So you can also see, you already see these ghost villages on the other side of the border in India. So there is a lot of transformation already happening there. And we wanted to look at combining two different frameworks. So this leverage point framework originally developed by Donella Meadows, that, well, the main takeaway is that you have the shallow leverage points, and then you have the deep leverage points, where the shallow leverage points alone, they can't really spur transformation. But then in combination with these deep leverage points that are addressing worldviews and values and social structures, you have the potential to spur sustainability transformation. So in this study, we combined this leverage point realms, or the leverage point framework, with resilience capacities. So you have the coping capacity. It's your capacity in dealing with short-term events and absorb shocks, like a flood or a drought. You have adaptive capacity, that is more longer-term ability to deal with more longer-term change, but still staying within the same stability domain. And then you have transformative capacity that is really having the capacity to change stability domain to a different, to a new stability domain. So when you put these two frameworks side by side, you can really notice that there is kind of a similar logic emerging there. And so we wanted to test if this analog holds place and if this is a useful combination to build resilience and spur food system transformation. So we selected 5 districts across both the lowlands in the south, to the mid-hills that are forest covered, to the high mountains in the north. We interviewed 39 purposely sampled key informants from 3 subgroups, so farmers, government officials, and experts. And then we also did 2 focus groups with farmers. And the recordings were transcribed, and then later we conducted thematic analysis with using NVivo. So we were tracking for instances where the informants would propose an improvement to the food system that aligned both with the definition of leverage points and the different level of the leverage points, as well as one of the 3 capacities, so coping, adaptive, and transformative.
And the analysis yielded in 11 leverage points, so including both deep and shallow, and they're all captured here. So I can't explain all of them, of course, individually, because I have only probably 4 minutes left. But I want to draw your attention to the bottom part, where you have the deep leverage points. So here is many of the topics that you have already heard previous presentations on. For example, Paula and Riina were discussing about this justice aspects, and so we have leverage point 1, dynamic connected rural areas supporting food self-sufficiency. So this is really addressing kind of the system goal, really taking a step back and saying, like, where are we running? What are we running towards? So in the background is that in Nepal, there is, because there's less able men in the rural areas, so they don't have enough manpower to actually farm the fields. So there's a lot of fields that are abandoned. So people have started to import a lot of rice that is also cheaper and easier. And you can totally understand that if you're a mother and you have many children, it's easy to buy this imported cheap rice instead of farming it yourself. But it's also this heavy reliance on imported food. It also makes the country vulnerable to shocks, political shocks, as well as natural shocks. So that's just one example. We have leverage points 2 is addressing knowledge systems and like really taking pride in this local and traditional culture. So there's a lot of road developments in Western Nepal, and this is really transforming the society, market economy is arriving, and so on. So we also had leverage points that are supporting adaptive capacity and leverage points supporting coping capacity. And they are the coping capacity leverage points, they were very tangible. They're addressing farming inputs, and I mentioned this abandoned fields. So there's a lot of ultra-poor people in Nepal. So would it be possible to actually reallocate these abandoned fields and then improve storage facilities? So there's a lot of food loss. So these are very tangible aspects. And then in contrast to this, more like deep leverage points under addressing the paradigms and system goals. So here are the results again in a table. We can see that our hypothesis confirmed that the leverage points from the intent realm, they indeed support transformative capacity. The design realm supports adaptive capacity, and this shallow leverage points from the material and feedback realm, they support coping capacity as well as of adaptive capacity. And then there has been a lot of research also on the potential of creating transformative pathways using the leverage point framework. And we can indeed see that here are some synergetic effects between the shallow and the deep leverage points. So, so we conclude that this is both of these frameworks are heuristic tools that are possible for politicians and practitioners to approach and understand and apply. So we encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Linda, please don't go away. Please take and sit here. I'm going to invite all the speakers here in front of. So here is good places for you. And we have still a couple of minutes to discuss together, which is wonderful and important. So Jani and Annukka, please join these chairs here so it helps us to see you all here. So now we stop recording the meeting. Okay. No. So you are here to discuss, and we are here to